Welcome to this presentation from Venus Alchemy on the perspective of the Venus retrograde cycle. I'm Kaylin Castell. I'm here with Tammy Brunk, and we have some really great information to share with you. So we're so glad you're here and you're joining us for this amazing journey.
So just to begin, these are some facts about how the Venus retrograde cycle actually works, how it operates in the sky. So Venus is retrograde for 40 days and 40 nights. It always begins when Venus is in the evening sky. And within the context of this retrograde, from 3 to 4 days before interior conjunction with the sun, within this cycle, Venus will disappear from the evening sky. Venus will be
Can I just say real quickly what the interior conjunction is? Because sometimes people don't really know that Venus actually makes two conjunctions with the sun. One we call interior, but mainstream astrologers call inferior. However, inferior sounds like it's less than. And so, and interior describes exactly where Venus is. She's between the Earth and the sun. So meaning she's closest to the Earth and between the Earth and the sun. And so hence she's on the interior passage between the Earth and the sun. And she's always retrograde when that happens. There is another Venus-Sun conjunction that happens that we call exterior, because she's on the other side of the sun, as far away from the Earth as she can possibly be. And she's then also in the underworld much longer. And we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of the short metamorphic passage of this during this time. But just so you know the difference and why it's called the interior conjunction.
Awesome. And then the one that's the outer or the exterior is also called, is that called superior in traditional astrology?
More mainstream astrology called superiors, which makes it sound like it's more or better.
Right.
And that's why we changed the language to describe where Venus actually is, either on the interior between the Earth and the sun, or on the exterior on the other side of the sun, far, far away from the Earth.
Awesome. I love that it's also teaching language, so you actually get how it feels, what happens experientially. So within this cycle then, Venus then is with the sun on an average of 7 to 8 days. That's going to vary, but that's the average. And then within the cycle, then Venus will rise as morning star, still retrograde. And Venus is retrograde in the evening sky for about 16 days and retrograde in the morning sky for about 16 days. So there are 40 total days of Venus retrograde. 16 Venus's evening star plus 16 morning star equals 32. And then on average, about 8 days when Venus is in the underworld or is not visible in the morning or evening sky because Venus is with the sun. So equaling 40 days.
And just the idea of the 40, of course, that's also average, because sometimes it may be a little bit longer, slightly longer, or slightly shorter, but this is the average number of days that it's retrograde. And it's interesting because 40 is an important number to Venus, to the Venus cycle, but we also know that there's, like the flood, there was the rain for the 40 days and 40 nights, and then there was there's other stories about going out into the wilderness for 40 days. And so there's this whole thing around the 40-day piece. And it just so happens that the Venus retrograde happens to be around 40 days.
Yes.
Right? So it's important to keep that in mind and to work with that possibility, that 40 days. Yeah.
And I just love, though, that you get, and we'll talk more about other sacred numbers that are embedded within this cycle. But it's just, I think, really powerful and potent to recognize that this 40-day number is seen across traditions as being a sacred number, as being a sacred period of timing. And you can really feel that, that this is a period, this is a portal, in a sense, the Venus retrograde cycle, where we're going through a profound initiation that really takes us beyond ordinary time. And we can see that for one thing, with that 40-day archetypal energy.
And the other thing is about the 40-year piece, because every 8 years there are 5 Venus cycles. 8 times 5 is 40. At age 40, you go through a Venus return, and it's often quite profound at that time when people are going through their Venus return at age 40. So, and also interestingly, the number 40 is connected to the return of the Shekinah. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go along. So,
awesome.
So Venus alchemy view of the Venus retrograde. We wanted to give you this perspective, and this really is rooted in the shamanic astrology paradigm view of any retrograde, but particularly because anytime a planet is retrograde, it's closest to the Earth, it's brightest, it's in a sense, its greatest strength visibly. So we're not looking at it as a time when Venus is diminished, because rather she's very stunning in the sky. And she's also in this process, when she goes retrograde in the evening sky, she's beginning this deep inner reflection to synthesize and complete the entire 19-month cycle, almost 19-month cycle that she began almost 19 months prior. So very powerful, deeper inner reflection, but it's from a place of strength and power, not from being diminished. Very important distinction. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything more about that, Tammy?
Just that if you think this is something that, this presentation we're giving here is just a very, just a small amount of information, but in our other classes, we go much further into depth around, for example, Venus as morning star, because we're just touching on it now, but that is the beginning of a new cycle, and it's a time of great power. And in fact, it's such a potent time that this was the sacred timing when in many cultures they would stage their battles for when Venus rose as morning star. They would offer blood sacrifice at this moment. So again, within the heart of this retrograde Venus cycle is the beginning of the actual new Venus cycle, and a time of profound power, which was recognized across many, many cultures.
Yes, beautiful. And so it is at the heliacal rise meaning Venus is rising up into the morning sky before the sun. So it comes up sometimes, it over time it gets longer, but 20 minutes, 40 minutes before the sun. I think it has to be almost 40 minutes before the sun before it's really visible, but she pops up into the morning sky, stunning, bright. You cannot miss her. She is really there. And this is one of the reasons why many ancient cultures began the new Venus cycle with the heliacal rise of Venus when she comes up retrograde in the morning sky, so close to the Earth, really bright. And we really see this as a total reincarnation. So whatever sign or meta goddess or the major player of the feminine that was on the world stage for 19 months goes through this metamorphic shift and then becomes another expression of the divine feminine that will play out for the next 19 months. And again, as Tammy was saying so beautifully a moment ago, we go in greater depth in this in our ceremonial journey, as well as some of the other classes that we offer. So just have that sense of how she is shifting. She's going through this metamorphosis from one expression of the divine feminine to another expression. And so we also see Venus as the primary archetype of the divine feminine. And this is important because when we look at how mainstream astrology looks at this, it's somewhat different. And so for women, Venus then represents their intended feminine expression in the current life. And for men, Venus represents their inner feminine, their inner beloved, their inner other, that expression of the feminine they're meant to connect with in a more deep and internal way. So now we're going to look at, so this is very different than what we're going to look at next in terms of how mainstream astrology looks at Venus cycle and Venus retrograde.
Because within more mainstream or conventional other paradigms of astrology, some common views of Venus retrograde are, and these are not views from the shamanic astrology paradigm or Venus alchemy. There's also the understanding of how Venus rules social and love relationships, marriage, beauty, money, financial security, what is value. These are kind of the general themes for Venus, according to many other astrological traditions. And conventional wisdom would say that during Venus retrograde, the energy turns in on itself. So there's kind of a negative connotation in some sense, that there's something, again, that Venus is kind of diminished in some way, there's something that's challenging, that's difficult, that's happening that we need to navigate. So that conventional understanding also says, along those themes, don't start a love affair or get married in Venus retrograde, that this might be the time where hidden undercurrents in relationships surface. It feels really intense. Maybe it's even bitchy. And what's interesting when you see some of these articles or some of this information that you'll see out there about Venus retrograde, what I think sometimes you'll see is the hidden kind of negative perception of the feminine in general, which is interesting, right? Yeah. So you can see the undercurrent of that. More fragile and vulnerable, again, like what are the negative stereotypes about what it means to be female? Maybe hidden, repressed, minimized, difficult to use the energy consciously. Major financial undertakings are not advised, though creating a budget and financial plan is advised. Not a time to remodel, renovate, get a new wardrobe, cosmetic surgery, or new hairdo. Parties or social events are not advised. So these are just some of what you might see out there, some of the things, and we're not saying, some of these things you might resonate with. But from the shamanic astrology paradigm, there's a lot more going on. And we can look at this in not just the mundane level, but at more of a sacred, as a sacred initiation. And Kaylin, I know you've got a lot more to say about this.
Well, what's interesting is that, sometimes we need to remodel. Sometimes we need to have, maybe not cosmetic surgery, but, sometimes we need to go through some kind. And because it is that part of the cycle where she's going through her metamorphosis, maybe it is a perfect time to be doing those things. And so this conventional idea that it's not a good time to do those things, it's time. I think it's good for us to relook at that. And if we have a clear intention, if we're really looking at that, then with intention and stepping into something with intention, it can be powerful. And I just want to also say, I was married in a Venus retrograde. It lasted for 16 and a half years, that marriage. So it lasted quite a long time. It was mostly a pretty good marriage. And there were other things that were interestingly undercurrents that I was not aware of that surfaced later. But I also know people who were married in a Venus retrograde and have been married over 30 years. And it's still going strong and still great. So, and people who, I've been married when Venus wasn't retrograde and that didn't last either. So I don't think it's a gauge. Honestly, just, whatever. A lot of it depends on our intention, if we're really paying attention to what's going on, if we have a clear intention, if we're going to start something at that particular time. It may be the perfect time. Maybe it's the exact synthesis that's needed at that particular time. These are judgments that are made, and I don't know exactly what the basis of the judgments are for this time, but we wanted you to see, have this perspective and know what other people say about it, so that you can make your own decisions. We're not saying that this is what's going to happen. We're just saying this is how other people have seen it.
And I think, considering that these are some perspectives on how to work with it, we would really, I think that it's really essential, again, like what we had said a moment ago, to understand that Venus is actually at her strength. And if you think about Venus as being the divine feminine, and there are many ways to look at the divine feminine, but within the shamanic astrology paradigm, one of the ways we see that is that the feminine has to do with the journey of consciousness or of light or of spirit into matter. And so it's more of an involutionary journey. So it has a lot to do with deep presencing. That's part of how I feel that sometimes. Like, how do we bring ourselves fully into our bodies, into incarnation, into our into this world? How do we bring ourselves fully here? How do we fully land here? That's one way to look at it. And if the divine feminine, looking at it that way, or just saying the divine feminine is much more deeply present, is more accessible, you could say, in a way where we can really be still and feel her presence, you can see how really engaging the cycle in that kind of way is different than just looking at a checklist of do this, don't do that. It's sacred timing. Right, it's profoundly powerful time of great mystery. And I think when we talk about it, Kaylin, I'm sure you feel this way too, like part of the reason why in our list it's not saying do this, don't do that, is because, at least from my perspective, and maybe you feel this too, Kaylin, working with this Venus cycle as long as we have, and you've worked much longer, but we've worked intensively together with it for a while. This, to me, is the time of most profound mystery in what happens in the cycle, because you're ending one cycle, you're beginning another. And so I'm always curious, is my dominant feeling in this part of the cycle? Like, what gets to happen now? And just like, this is a time of high magic, that's for sure. So,
absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that in. And the other thing that you reminded me of is that because Venus has many expressions. So, and you know, if we look at mainstream astrology saying that she's about relationships, she's about marriage, she's about money, she's about finance, that's a somewhat limited perspective of the feminine, because she's so much more than that. She and you know, this idea that she rules, you know, our social relationships or our social experiences, that kind of thing. And one of the things we do in shamanic astrology and also in Venus alchemy is that we're eliminating the hierarchical language, the rulerships. So what does Venus resonate with? And what she resonates with is all the expressions of the divine feminine. And there are many that go way beyond love, money, beauty, that kind of thing. It goes way beyond that. And they may all have different ways of expressing how they would be in a relationship if they chose to. But some expressions of the feminine really aren't interested in focusing on relationship at all. So really important.
What I want to add to that, Kaylin, because I think that's so powerful what you're saying, and it's such a fundamental aspect of shamanic astrology and Venus alchemy in terms of what we open up in this work. And also, I would propose that Venus is about connection, reconnecting, making so it is about relationship in some sense. You might agree with me with that, Kaylin, but it's not about just love relationship or social relationship. It's much bigger than that. So that, for example, if you're working with Virgo Venus, you're talking about the sacred patterning, the relationship between the relationship between all things in the creation, not just my relationship with my mother or my boyfriend, which is what, Venus has been reduced to.
Right. Yeah, the sacred, the relationship with the sacred, if you're looking at it from the Virgo perspective. The relationship with self-love, if you're looking at it from the Leo perspective. The relationship with family, if you're looking at it from the Cancer perspective. So there's so many different ways that we can look at it in connection to how we relate. But that could be true of Mars, that could be true of our rising sign, that could be true of different other aspects too. It's not just Venus that's going to have necessarily the focus on how we relate to certain archetypal energies. And it has tended to be the mainstream view that it is the one planet that is connected to a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
We just
she has to do all the work of relationship. No, change that.
Right? Exactly. So we just don't want to limit it to that, but we also do want to make sure that piece is included. So I appreciate you bringing that up in that way as well. So, all right. So one of the things now we're going to look at is the importance of the number 36 in the Venus cycle, and also how this relates to the Shekinah, the expression of the divine feminine, that particularly from the Hebrew perspective. It was called the Shekinah, and there may be other cultures that had different names for it, but this is the one that we know. And what the Hebrews saw the number 36 is being the number of initiation, and that it was associated with so many different pieces. So it's like the number of the sky. And Jacob Ballman, we're going to talk about him in the next slide in just a moment, but he associated with the angelic world. And it's because it is the sum of the eight first numbers, or the first eight numbers of numbers. Like, so if you add 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 and up to 8, you get the number 36. Pretty interesting number magic. And of course, 8 is also a number of Venus as well. And so the Hebrew letters for 36 are 30, and I don't really know exactly how to pronounce this. Lamd, maybe, somebody who's got more of a Hebrew Jewish background could probably do better without that. But anyway, it's the number 30, and Vav, or the number 6. And so the 36 are referred to as these Lamd Vav Zadikim, or Zadik Nistar, something like that. And so basically it's based on the Talmud that every generation has 36 righteous ones. And this really struck me. And these are the ones who greet the Shekinah, or the divine feminine, the divine presence. And the Shekinah is the divine feminine presence that is symbolized by the planet Venus. And interestingly, the Temple of Solomon was built not only to track the spring equinox, but to track the time when Venus was rising just before the sun near the spring equinox, way back when. And so when that happened, the sun and Venus coming back together, and then also the sun and Mercury showing up in the east together, that would happen every 40 years. It was seen as the return of the Shekinah. So pretty cool. And you just, to look back through history to see how different cultures have worked with us, and to get some ideas about how this can show up for us. And then Jacob Boehm, who we'll see more of in the next slide, he wrote that Venus represented love of life and spiritual rebirth. And when we look at the
I love
Venus,
that.
right? Yeah,
that's so beautiful. Cool. Love of life and spiritual rebirth. That's so cool.
Yeah, I know. And so I love that perspective, because it's way bigger than sort of the mainstream perspective these days. And the thing about Venus alchemy, it's like Venus alchemy implies spiritual rebirth in the name that we're using to work with these mysteries. So how perfect is that?
It's beautiful. And I mean, Kaylin, don't you feel like if you really were to sort of summarize what happens and how it feels to work through the Venus mysteries every time, it is literally a rebirthing, but it's also love of life. I know for me that's exactly the feeling that
I agree 100%.
Venus mysteries.
Yeah, it's absolutely so true. Yeah, so Jacob Boehm, he was born April 24th, 1575 in Poland, and he died November 17th, 1624 in Germany. And he was considered a German philosopher, a Christian mystic, a Lutheran Protestant theologian, and an original thinker by many. He also created some challenges for some people in terms of the things that he looked at. He had his first book, it's commonly known as Aurora, which basically has to do with the light of the sun, aurora, or the light energy, that kind of thing. Anyway, this book diverged from mainstream church theology, and so it created a bit of a scandal. And he believed in some things that were very much different. I'll let you talk about that, Tammy. But I just wanted to say that what I get about this man, Jacob Boehm, is that how it's said?
We were looking it up. Bemba, it's the German speakers in the room, listening to this, will have a better way of saying it. If you were to say it in German, I think it's Bemba. I'm not sure now.
Yeah, right. Not our language, so it's hard to retain. But anyway, in a sense, it's like he was a precursor to the work that we're doing now, based on some of the ways that he saw things, and because he also worked with the alchemists and looked at their point of view and so on. So I'm going to turn it over to you to share more about that, but I just want to give him kudos for his perspective and what he shared. And
yes, perhaps one of our elders in a sense, and an advocate for the divine feminine without even maybe necessarily having seen himself that way. But he saw, so some of the ways he diverged from the more conventional church doctrine at the time was that he saw the fall as a necessary stage in the evolution of the universe and humanity, and he also believed that in order to reach God, a person had to go through hell first, which is a pretty powerful perspective at that time. And also Kaylin was looking it up, and he has a Scorpio moon. So how perfect, of course, for him to be able to articulate this. So he, brought in, he was way ahead of his time. mean, almost, really speaking into some of the same material that Jung would bring forward generations later. So he saw free will as the most important gift that God gave to humanity. He would have been a Neoplatonist and also have been influenced by many of the alchemists, the ancient alchemical writers of his time and before his time in the European tradition. And he saw free will as the most important gift God gave to humanity, which is, again, way ahead of his time. You'll have so many thinkers who would have really, they would have been speaking to that at that time, but it wouldn't have become anything that was really well articulated until probably the 1800s or the 20th century, maybe. So he felt that God was somehow incomplete without the creation, is another really fascinating thing about his cosmology. So interesting, his perspectives on Venus and his contribution as well.
Yes, so yay for him. So a little bit more on Venus retrograde. We're going to kind of come back to him in a little bit in a moment. Also, just because there's more that it's not about him specifically, but about the name, actually. Anyway, interestingly, Venus retrograde in the number 36. So morning star Venus, so once Venus rises as a morning star, is 36 days before before it reaches maximum brightness, and after the conjunction with the sun, that interior we were talking about when Venus is between the sun and the earth. And then 36 days after that reaches actually maximum elongation, we should say. And then, so the exterior conjunction occurs 216 days or 6 times 36 days after maximum elongation. So the exterior conjunction, remember, Venus conjuncts the sun while retrograde, then is a morning star for like almost 260 days, and then reaches conjunction with the sun again, and it's about 216 days after, and that's 6 times 36. So here we have the number 36 showing up again in the Venus cycle. Then Venus becomes an evening star and reaches maximum elongation 216 days after that exterior conjunction, or when Venus is with the sun for the longer period of time. And then maximum brightness follows 36 days later, and the interior conjunction is 36 days after that. So this is amazing to think about how this number keeps showing up in the Venus cycle. Mm-hmm. So,
wow.
Yeah. There's a book called or there's a passage or something that's called the Apocalypse of Moses, and it describes the life of Adam and Eve after they were expelled from the Garden of Eden, and they were told to choose a penance. And so Eve decided she would spend 36 days in the Tiger River, representing the number 36 in the Venus cycle, the divine feminine choosing the 36 days. And Adam chose to spend 40 days in the Jordan River. And, they were fasting. But basically, both of these numbers, 36 and 40, are sacred numbers to the Venus cycle. And so just interesting to note. And so the 40-day retrograde piece of Venus being retrograde for 40 days, and then how Venus is 36 days, so often to its either maximum brightness or elongation, or however that's manifesting. And then this is where we're going to come kind of connect with Jake Baum. This TV show Touch, and that it's not so available anymore. It was kind of like a 2011, 2012 kind of thing. But in the show, and if you can still find it, I don't know if you can still find it or not, the main character is named Jake Baum, and he does not speak. He does not use words. He uses numbers to help make important corrections in the web of life. And as you go through the show, he becomes identified as one of the 36 righteous ones, who is helping to put right what once went wrong idea, right? So anyway, that's fairly recent. It's a fairly recent show, and it's something that just speaks to the importance of this. Like, it's in the collective consciousness, something for us to just be tuned into, and just know about that it has shown up more recently as well. Anything more you want to say about that, Tammy?
Nope, that's great.
Okay. So the Venus cycle and the golden triangle. So here we see this imagery here. It is the 5-pointed star inside the pentagram, and that when you take just any one portion of it, and you can this yellow highlighted part could be highlighted 5 times within the pentagram. 2 sides of this are, there's the number 72, the angle. At the bottom here, these are 72 degrees, and then at the top here, it's 36, half of 72. And so the Venus cycles, there are 5 of them, 5 19-month cycles every 8 years, and 13, Venus goes around the sun 13 times in those 8 years. So from our perspective, Venus is circling the sun 13 times. And these numbers, 5, 8, and 13, connect to the Fibonacci sequence. The other thing about 72 is it's really significant in so many other cycles. And I think it also speaks to the importance of the Venus cycle, because the precession of equinoxes and solstices is moving 1 degree every 72 years. And then if we see that the pentagram has this 72 degree angle that keeps showing up within it, and that's happened. Our 72 is 36 times 2, so we see the 36 coming back into the whole story. So there's just this number magic that is kind of mind blowing and definitely worth tuning into. Mm-hmm. Wow. So what happened is that this is a crop circle. This was it showed up in 2010. So some years ago in Wiltshire, and we're going to see how the sacred geometry connects to 36 and 72 in a moment. But you can see the 5-pointed star in the center, and of this particular crop circle. And now you can see if we start at a specific place, like at 0. And that, of course, would come back to 360 if we're looking at the full circle. The next point is 36, and the next point is 72. And so 36 and 36 is 72, and 72 and 36 is 108, and 108 and 36 is 144, and on around the circle like that. So the 36 piece goes up in every point of the circle of the 5-pointed star, and that is the symbol that Venus is creating in the sky. So this number 36, it's increasing by 36, and then the red points are where it's increasing by 72 each time, because 72 and 72 is 144, plus 72 is 216. So this number magic, it's like the sacred geometry that Venus carries encoded within her cycle, and how she moves through the sky and attunes us to this sacred geometry.
I love it. It's so interesting, Kaylin, because when you first shared this, I really don't think I got it. It's so fascinating because when you look at the internal Venus, the 5-pointed star, that connects to the sacred numbers of 5 and 8 in a sense, because it has to do with the morning star rise of Venus in a different season, every 19 months about, and creating an 8-year cycle. And so it's the numbers, it's the internal cycle, and the internal numbers of the Venus cycle are 5 and 8. But then what's fascinating to me is to look at this and to consider that it's almost like there's an encompassing or a holding or a containing kind of alchemy or magic that's occurring on the periphery, on the outside, that's resonating with the number 9, basically, or the 36, because 36, of course, adds up to 9.
And 72 adds up to 9, and 108 adds up to 9, and 144 adds up to 9.
Right. So that's so powerful and so fascinating to me. Again, like that feeling of curiosity. When I was just in the Yucatan and speaking to my Mayan guide at Chichen Itza about the way that they have I was telling him about the Venus cycle and about the way that we work with it. And he was saying in their underworld, their inframundo, there are 9 levels that you will descend and ascend. And it was interesting because I was thinking, well, he was really clear. He's like, in our work that we do with the Inanna cycle, there are 7 gates that we work with, and sometimes 8. So there's 8 gates at times, but we work with the number 8. So I was like, where does this 9 number fit into the Venus cycle? When he was speaking about this, I was just like, where does that come in? And it's so fascinating then, Kaylin, as soon as I came back, that you were like bringing this in, because I hadn't really seen it before.
Right. Right. Those 9 levels or 9 dimensions or 9 possibilities, or, however else we could look at the 9, and the number magic of 9. 9 always gives itself to whatever number it's connected to. So if you add 9 plus 4, you get 13, and 1 plus 3 is 4. So 9, and you can do this with any number, and multiplication also. It's like there's that magic of 9 that's always kind of giving itself to whatever it's connected to.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. So this is something for you to know. And also, I think these are 10 points, like a dodecahedron around the 5-pointed star. If you look at the impact points, that happen in this. And this is a crop circle that was given to us in 2010. So amazing. I love how the universe is speaking to us all the time, and from the number magic as well. Of the Venus cycle, of the pentagram, of these different numbers. So anyway, one of the things that's really cool about this slide is that this is, if we look at this inner circle here as the movement of Venus through the sky, and actually I should have probably had it it's backwards, but the point being, here's the Earth, here's Venus in the interior conjunction, here's the Sun, and here's Venus on the exterior conjunction. So way far away from the Earth, as far as it can get when that's happening. And from the time of the conjunction to going to, say, if we're going to the morning star, it's 72 days till it gets to the maximum elongation. And then the same thing happening in the evening sky. When Venus goes retrograde, it's 72 days before it gets to the conjunction. So that number 72 comes back into play again. And then, of course, 36, the halfway points in between, are all coming into play with that. And interestingly, another piece of the 72, it's 0.72 degrees that the Earth's distance from the Sun, the distance of Venus from the Sun equals 0.72 of the Earth's distance from the Sun. So there's that number again. It just keeps coming up over and over and over.
Yeah. Well, and I love too that you use this as an opportunity to show a diagram of what it actually looks like to have Venus at the interior conjunction and the exterior conjunction. Because when you look at that, it's like, okay, that's, there's the Earth, there's Venus. So Venus is between the Earth and the Sun here, and then it's on the other side of the Sun from our perspective there. So it's nice. I like having that visual.
So always retrograde when it's between the Earth and the Sun. Always direct when it's in its far away conjunction to the Sun. And we go much more deeply into this in the Venus Signature series, but it has significant meaning because it's a 7 or 8 day conjunction with the Sun when it's in the metamorphic underworld, and it's the 60 to 90 day conjunction when it's in the long underworld where Inanna, in the story of Inanna, she's dying and being reborn. And that's something we go into much more in depth in the other classes that we teach. But I think, Tammy's now going to talk a little bit about the metamorphic underworld as we get ready to wrap this up.
Yes, absolutely. So we, again, just speaking very briefly into this because we share much, much more. It's a much longer story to talk about the way we work with the Venus cycle ceremonially, but it's based on the Sumerian tellings of the descent of the goddess Inanna, which is a literal description of how the Venus cycle works. So we reenact that journey, that story, that powerful, potent myth in our ceremonial journey, our ceremonial courses. But something to note is that in the Venus cycle, when you look at it as the goddess going into the underworld, being reborn, and then reemerging, is that this point that we're talking about when Venus is retrograde, is this the time, like within this deeper retrograde cycle, when Venus is with the sun, and we cannot see her in the evening or the morning sky, we see that as the metamorphic phase, or the metamorphic goddess phase, where we are going through a complete and total metamorphic process, like the butterfly when it comes, when it is in the chrysalis, going through a complete and total metamorphosis into something absolutely different than it was before. So that's also at the heart of this Venus retrograde cycle, is this profound metamorphosis that each of us are invited to consciously engage with. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of that background for the questions, because we always often in our courses, we'll do even more around creating home play or deepening exercises, but we also very often have questions that we can use and really journal on and really deepen into. And so some questions to consider are, during the Venus retrograde cycle, are, where is the goddess shining brightly in my life now? And I say this, I speak to this because, of course, Venus is at her strongest, her brightest. Even when you can't see her with the sun, she's still very close to the earth, so she's very powerful, she's present. So really to ask that question, and I think this question is more of a felt sense. It's not a cerebral question. It's really to ask and really to tune in our lives, like even just in this moment, just to ask, where is the feminine showing up? Where is the goddess? Where is the divine feminine? Is she really lighting up for me my sacred work? Is she really lighting up for me the need for me to connect with my child or my mother? Or where is she really showing up for me to help me speak my voice and my truth for the first time? Where is the goddess showing up brightly, powerfully, strongly in my life right now? And what is she wanting me to hear? What is she wanting me to act on? So really, how is she coming alive in my life now? So that's really just a question to ask, because she is strong, she's powerful, she's potent. How can she be more present and alive? And how can we acknowledge and feel and hear her now? And then what old identities am I releasing now? So really, again, to be asking that question, this is also part of the Venus cycle. One version of the goddess is dying and a new version is being reborn at the ending and beginning of a cycle. So I can ask myself that, what old ideas of who I am need to die now so I can be reborn? And then the next question, in what areas of my life am I experiencing a rebirth? Where am I being reborn? What feels new? What feels like it's tender and vulnerable and needs my care? And then in what areas of my life would I like to experience a complete metamorphosis? Because again, this is what's available to us now if we engage consciously with it. So, and then what would it take for me to open to this complete metamorphosis now? So these are just some ideas, suggestions. You might just sit with these in meditation, or you might journal on them over the course of the retrograde cycle. That's just one suggestion of how to work with it.
Beautiful. So I think that's bringing us to the end of this presentation, and there's definitely an opportunity to go deeper, to learn more, to be a part of our Venus Alchemy group. If you have questions, you can email us at info@venusalchemy@gmail.com. If you don't know where your Venus is and you want to cast a free chart, you can go to aleg.com/free chart and find that information out. Also, if you want to deepen your understanding of the Venus retrograde cycle and the personal chart, as well as the current Venus ceremonial journey or the Venus signature series that we've done 2 of them now, you can go to venusalchemy.com and go to our classes and find out more. And we would love to have you join us, because this work has been so life-changing. I know, Tammy, you probably agree with me. It has completely ignited me in ways, and I have been working with the Venus cycle for 23 years. It's ignited me in just amazing new ways, and what we've discovered and what we've been learning and what we've been tuning into, and how Venus keeps revealing more and more of herself to us. It's just powerful.
Absolutely.
It's been so fabulous to do it with a community of others to join. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So thank you for being with us. And of course, I agree with you, Kaylin, as you know. So good to be with you. And we hope that you've enjoyed this and hope to see you in the future in one of our courses. Be well.